Much love to the music. It gets much respect. Can you dig it?
Welcome back. Here we are, episode 6. And today we're going to address how we got here. This was actually supposed to be episode 5, but sometimes you have to wait and gain your focus. And that's exactly what I did, because I had announced sometime back in episode 4, I was going to explain how we got into the situation that we're in. And this is not new knowledge, but a lot of people have not heard this. Based on so many reasons, mainly because of how dominated the media is being controlled by those who want to spread propaganda and keep you sleeping. Yes, you're anti-woke, or they don't want you to have the truth. However, it's been out there, the information's in the Library of Congress. There are some real competent professionals, real journalists that are out there that have been reporting this. And this thing actually goes back about 100 years. And it's so funny because I was saying that, but to have real competent journalists like Jeremy Scahill out there, real professionals, John Buchanan, of course, he got discredited, but he was on it. He was telling you exactly what was going on, and that's one reason he got discredited. And he made some political runs, but that's neither here nor there. The reality is that he did dig up the truth. They have dug up the truth. And there are so many others that have been trying to warn people, but they do not have the mainstream media working with them. Matter of fact, mainstream media is trying to make sure that you are not awake, or as the other side likes to say, because they consider themselves the other side, even though we're all one people, we should all have the interests of this country and our democracy at heart. They seem to be operating for, for fascism. They're going for fascism. A lot of them probably don't even know what it is, but they're operating for fascism. But I want to share something with you real quick from Jeremy Scahill, who used to be at Intercept. He's got a lot of things going on right now. He's still out there. So listen to this.
Donald Trump doesn't have enough time left in his life to commit even a fraction of the international crimes that George H.W. Bush carried out during his decades in power at the CIA, as vice president, and ultimately as president. Not even close. Journalists today believe that they're so brave in calling out Trump's lies, in investigating his real estate deals, in probing his associates, and yet none of them have the spine to accurately describe the well-documented, indisputable crimes committed by George H.W. Bush. What we are witnessing is a powerful media class and an elite political class whitewashing the life of a man who used his various positions not to make the world a better place, but to wage unthinkable wars, to undermine democratic movements, to kill innocent people, to orchestrate coups and invasions. And the reason no one talks about these crimes is because it's a sacrilege to do so in the American religion of exceptionalism.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. Now, as you can tell, this was during the period of when Bush #1 had passed away. And the press offered a manufactured record, and Mr. Scahill was actually telling you the real record. Now, all of this stuff is available to the American public. All of this. And I know everyone likes to watch their television shows, but we really need to understand, while we've been sleeping, what's been going on. You really, really need to pay attention to this. But that piece of information sums it all up. And yeah, he looks pretty angry about it, and we all should be. But here's the thing: don't lose sight of it, because the ones you know are still not the folks that are running the show. The folks that you see up front are expendable. The real power does that to all of the political people, political players. They're expendable. So you can't really touch power. And that's the whole idea. You don't know who your opponent really is. So I got something else that I'd like to share with you. And again, this is Mr. Scahill, who was formerly at The Intercept. He's got a lot of things going on. He's really good at what he does. But the one thing that I like about him is he's really trying to get at the truth. He's getting the public record. So that's the one thing that we keep, that we're not paying attention to. This is all public record. But if you listen to the news, you get fairy tales. They don't want to wake you. They want to keep it going. And then when you are awake, it's usually because that's part of their agenda, because they're getting ready to switch and do something else. And they need something. But you need to listen to this coming up, because all the evidence is here. This is very fascinating. Check this out.
I've been an investigative reporter and a journalist for 35 years. I've worked in every major media market in the United States, and I've written for more than 100 newspapers and magazines nationally and internationally. So last September 17th, I became the first journalist in U.S. history to go to the U.S. National Archives and the Library of Congress and pore over the thousands of pages of documents in both places to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt or any refutation of the facts that Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George W. Bush, and George Herbert Walker, his maternal great-grandfather for whom his daddy is named, were Nazi traitors to the country who should have been tried for treason. 2 weeks ago in early August, a major world newspaper, The Guardian of London, finally got on the story internationally, and they flew a renowned reporter of theirs named Duncan Campbell over to Washington to take me back to the archives and Library of Congress so that they could verify that these explosive documents were real and I didn't have forged copies. Prescott Bush was the grandfather of George W. Bush and the father of George Herbert Walker Bush, and George Herbert Walker Bush is named for his father-in-law, George Herbert Walker. Prescott Bush graduated from Yale in 1917 and was in Skull and Bones with E. Roland Harriman, who was the younger brother of W. Averill Harriman. The Bush family really had nothing going. They were essentially social climbers and opportunistic people. At the time that Prescott Bush met Dorothy Walker, he was a tire salesman. And George Herbert Walker, as all fathers do when their daughter's going to marry someone, said in his heart, you know, it's not an appropriate thing socially that my daughter marry a tire salesman. So he brought Prescott Bush first into Brown Brothers Harriman and then Union Banking Corporation. In actuality, it was anything but a bank. It was essentially a Nazi money laundering operation that had a lot of tentacles into a lot of different other businesses.
All right. So I kind of cut that a little short, but I think you understand what they're showing and the type of evidence. This goes back 100 years. So how did we get here? It's been 100 years to get here. And so that's what these two journalists are talking about. All this information is sitting at the Library of Congress, but you're not going to have access to it very long, because the more that this stuff comes to the front where everybody can see it, where you can get a visual, the more they're going to try to suppress it. And that's one reason why you're seeing everything shut down. It is all a matter of public record. And you really, really need to start paying attention to it. So there are some things that we are going to talk about. We're going to talk about totalitarianism. We're going to talk about fascism, authoritarianism. We're going to talk about democracy, and we're actually doing that. But we're going to have, I guess, maybe a little civics lesson. Not that I'm an expert on it, and so that's why I am using content by the professionals to try to bring this to you. But I do understand exactly what they're saying, and I've been watching this stuff unfold for years. You can say decades. But for whatever reason, the public remains vexed. They wanted to sleep. The problem is the holographic image is starting to fluctuate, and the truth is starting to show itself. And mainly because the things that they're doing is getting to the point that it's disrupting people's ability to actually live. And not just people who are migrating, not just because of the, foreign policies of the Western powers, but how it's shaping out here at home to where it seems that the wealthy no longer feel like the everyday common man, that means woman, is useful to them. That we're starting to become more of a liability, and they're getting bolder and bolder. They think they can actually do without us, and now we're at the age of AI, Terminator style, mentality. All this is coming up, 1984, all of these things, we're kind of hearing echoes of literature, and we've been watching the past catch up to us. We just didn't recognize it because the stuff they don't want you to see, they just say, just keep sleeping. And then the stuff that they introduce, they call it progressive. There's nothing progressive about it. Matter of fact, it's de-evolving, for lack of a better word or better term. We are de-evolving. We are not evolving. And one of the things they like to do is to use what we think are differences. They create the idea that we're different, and then they see which one has the best momentum, and then they will continue to play one against the other. They keep us divided, and we think the enemy looks like us when it doesn't look like us. We don't really get to see them. Periodically, we get to read about them, we get to hear about them. We might see them, doing the Bilderberg thing and all this other stuff. Yeah, and so you hear all these things termed as conspiracy theories. There's nothing wrong with a conspiracy theory if there's some real if it's a real practical approach, some practical thought. I agree. If they're trying to tell you that aliens are coming down and they're taking over the planet, then you got to figure out what kind of aliens are they talking about and how do you define them and all of this. Yeah, we're not trying to go out there. A lot of the stuff is coming from within. There's no coup here. What you have is plain out grifting, thievery, and sadism. Just flat out evil. And you're watching it, and they're getting you to digest it by controlling the things that you take into your mind, the things that you read, the things that you watch. They want you to keep sleeping. You can dance and boogie all night long. Just stay away from what they're doing. That's what they're saying. All right, so I'm going to play another part for you. Just learn. Do the research. You can learn.
They owned a shipping line called Hamburg American Line, for example, which was the first Nazi front business seized, although the line was no longer operational in 1942. In the early 1930s, it transported Nazi spies into the U.S., and then their promotional ads offered cash rewards to any American citizens who would go back on Hamburg American lines and proselytize for Hitler. 8 months after the U.S. had entered the war, the New York Herald Tribune ran a front-page article, "Hitler's Angel has $3 million in U.S. bank." And it caused a major scandal and just rocked the world of politics. Brown Brothers Harriman, which George Herbert Walker and Prescott Bush were affiliated with and partners in, worked with I.G. Farben, which operated Auschwitz. Prescott Bush, he did a number of things that were not only anti-American but were pro-Hitler, and he did all that he could to proselytize for Hitler and the rise of his Third Reich, because the largest client, Fritz Thyssen, of his patron, W. Averill Harriman, dictated what kind of behavior he would practice to enhance his own career. So he was put on the board of directors of Union Banking Corporation, and he was also a shareholder in Union Banking Corporation along with E. Roland Harriman. But what's interesting about what the documents show is that they clearly state that all of the shareholders were phantom shareholders for Fitz-Thiessen and did his bidding directly. So the point I'm making is it's not as if they bought these shares of stock as a passive investment to hopefully profit from the war. They were directly doing the bidding of the individual who built the Nazi war machine.
Wow. So we're following the trail. The story is very consistent. There's a lot of documents at the Library of Congress. That's the one great thing about our vision of democracy is that we have a right to know. Their whole thing is to make sure that you're too distracted and you can't figure out what it is that you should know. And then they're going to redefine it and they're going to tell you. All I can say is that if you want your democracy, it's really, really going to be up to you. It's going to be up to all of us. That we have to fight for it, and it's still not too late. You know, I kept telling you about peace through nonviolence. Consider that, and the reason why I'm saying that is that people are fighting over time all the time, and they're dying. And the more wars you have, the more money these guys make. They don't care about what they quote unquote call collateral damage. They've gotten the public to accept, well, innocent people are going to die. It becomes problematic, though, when it hits your doorstep. But here's the thing. If our neighbor is dying, eventually it's going to get around to us, especially if we're the ones that are perpetrating it. And the Western powers are largely behind it. They make a great deal of money, arms, selling arms, and then all of the other things that comes with war. There are so many things. But that money does not go to the public. It's just like right now. Your taxes are gone. They've killed all these services within our government that was adding some benefit for the people who are the taxpayers. Now everything is going completely to the wealthy, and they can just grift. That's the whole thing. So maybe we need to talk about kind of some terms, you know. And what some folks have actually written in regards to our democracy, and I'm talking more about present times. So let's do that. So Jameson Smith, who's from Boston University, he wrote a piece around 2016. This was called America Demoted to a Flawed Democracy, which we are listed as 36 as a flawed democracy. Mr. Jameson starts out by saying, no longer the shining city upon a hill, as President Reagan proudly claimed in his parting note in 1989. We are not that shining city anymore. The U.S. has been demoted from a full democracy to a flawed democracy. We're getting worse than that. An indictment of the so-called uniqueness of the American project, or the American experiment, as we've heard. Jameson states the demotion occurred in 2016 with the election of Donald Trump. I would argue personally that it started way earlier than that, and Trump is a result of that. Jameson also says the United States is experiencing two major forms of democratic erosion in its governing institutions. Two forms, okay? Those two forms are election manipulation and executive overreach. Think about that. You can definitely see both of those happening, all right? Since 2010, state legislatures have instituted laws intended to reduce voter access to the ballot, politicize election administrations, and foreclose electoral competition via extreme, we're hearing this today, lot more extreme gerrymandering. It's to the point one party is doing it so much, the other party is like, well, we got to do it. This is how it's played now. That's what's happening. Jameson goes on, in the U.S., executive power has grown significantly, threatening civil service independence. We've seen that. Look at the executive powers. The court says he can do anything and he won't be charged. With a gridlocked, hyperpartisan Congress, impartial executive oversight is lacking, and judicial impartiality is in question. Definitely we're seeing that, right? They were supposed to be impartial, not anymore. Pretty much what he wants. Now, Vanessa Williamson at the Brookings Institute in 2023, she wrote a piece. And she started it out with a question. And her question was simply this: what is democratic decline? Everybody think about this. She goes on to say, globally, it's increasingly rare for an authoritarian to come to power via a coup. So authoritarians, it's rare for them to come to power via a coup, okay? Instead, she says, democracies in decline usually experience a slow but steady erosion. This is very, very important. Pay attention to that, slow but steady. The process is often incremental and episodic. And my, aren't we being conditioned more and more when you watch TVs? Oh, episodes, and it's got to go on forever and ever. It used to be this episode was one story, the next episode was a different story. She continues by saying each step is only partial. So it's kind of like, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, something like that. There can be intermediate moments of apparent stability or equilibrium. So things, you get hit and then things kind of mellow out. And then they hit you again and it mellows out. You get hit again, mellows out. In the words of political scientists, Daniel Ziblatt and Stephen Levitsky, now this is interesting. This is what they have to say. The electoral road to breakdown is dangerously deceptive. Think about that. Dangerously deceptive. And they're saying this, take a look at what's going on. And why do they call it dangerously deceptive? Well, they go on to say people still vote, right? We're still voting, right? Elected autocrats maintain a veneer of democracy while eviscerating its substance. Okay? So do we really need to break that down? Do we need to break that down? Okay. Many government efforts to subvert democracy are legal in the sense, right? So this is the breakdown. Legal in the sense that they are approved by legislature or accepted by the courts. Are we not seeing this right now? Total playbook for fascism, okay? Absolute playbook for fascism. Now, political scientists use a variety of terms to describe the phenomenon, including, now we're going to get it from the political scientists, pay attention, democratic erosion, you're going to hear these words, democratic backsliding, democratic regression, okay, and autocratization, or autocratization, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Hear what I'm saying to you. So whatever the terminology, democratic decline has ramifications throughout society, and we're seeing those. We are seeing these things happen right now, okay? It's associated with certain changes in public attitudes, including, and this plays all the time, including the vilification of members of the opposing party and widespread misinformation. This is why people don't know what to think. They don't even know what face to put with their enemy. Absolute chaos and confusion. That's part of the game. They go on to say that there tends to be a decline in non-governmental institutions critical to a healthy public sphere, such as independent media. How many journalists have died over the couple of decades? How many scientists have died over a couple of decades? Okay. They also talk about a vibrant education system. Look what they're doing to education right now. They're rewriting it, and they're going to reprogram. They're going to reset. And an engaged civil society. So they are controlling all of that. Okay. All these symptoms of decline are currently present in the United States. They are absolutely current in the United States. All right. And they're also, the one other thing that they wanted to say is that this report focuses on democratic decline in governments itself, because democratic backsliding tends to be driven by the choices of political leaders. So your political leaders are taking away your democracy. And it's not a sudden groundswell of authoritarianism in the general populace. The general populace are not making the decisions for an authoritarian state or a fascist state or a totalitarian state. It is the elected officials. So the United States is experiencing two major forms of democratic erosions in its governing institutions. Pay attention to this. You have strategic manipulation of elections. We're seeing that. Strategic manipulation of elections. Now, this is distinct from voter fraud, and they go on to say voter fraud is almost non-existent in the United States. Election manipulation has become increasingly common and increasingly extreme. And we're watching this. All right. So, and here's some examples, right? Examples include election procedures that make it harder to vote. We hear this all the time, right? This is like inadequate polling facilities, right? That's kind of an example. Or that reduce an opposing party's representation, gerrymandering. All right. So I hopefully I put that to you clear enough, but it's a lot. They go on to say that even legitimately an elected leader can undermine democracy if they eliminate governmental checks and balances. And man, that is so happening a lot. Okay, we are seeing that constantly all the time. And also if they consolidate power in an unaccountable institutions. Got these institutions, we don't know what they do. Other institutions are being slashed. They don't want to give you public knowledge of what your government is doing. Okay, so the United States has seen substantial expansions of executive power. This guy is signing executive orders like he's eating chiclets or popping Tic Tacs, you know. Let me go back. The United States has seen substantial expansion of executive powers and serious efforts to erode the independence of the civil service. Yep. And that's all under attack. Anything for the people can't be. It's got to be bad. Anything for them has to be good. In addition, there are serious questions about the impartiality of the judiciary. We are seeing all of this right now. Hopefully, I'm making this message really clear. Here are the words that I'm saying. Play them back over and over. Now, the American Academy in Berlin published a piece a while back, and it says How Democracies Die. Okay, this is the American Academy in Berlin. Remember Hitler, fascism, Mussolini, the Italians, World War II. They go on to state, American politicians now treat their rivals as enemies, intimidate the free press, and threaten to reject the results of elections. This is not just a Trump thing. He can't do it by himself, all right? He doesn't come to power by himself. They also state they try to weaken institutional buffers of our democracy, including the courts intelligence services, and ethics offices. Democracies may die at the hands not of generals, okay, but of elected leaders, presidents, or prime ministers who subvert the very process that brought them to power, meaning I'm in power now, nobody else gets in power. We're seeing so much of this. You got the guy talking about a third term. Really? I don't think so. But he's talking about it. They say, since the end of the Cold War, most democratic breakdowns have been caused not by generals and soldiers, but by elected governments themselves. So you've heard this like 3 times during the show by 3 different sources, okay? They also continue. We know that extremist demagogues emerge from time to time in all societies, even in healthy democracies. So America thinks that we can't produce this, that, or the other, and it's like, we are so full of ourselves, so cut off from reality. All right, the Institute also says the United States has had its share of them, including Henry Ford, Huey Long, Joseph McCarthy, and George Wallace. Now, that's reaching back a little bit in the past. We have a whole bunch more we can add to the list, and there's also a bunch that aren't actually listed that are in the Library of Congress who ran into, heads up with our government. So, think about that for a second. This is where we are. Now I'm going to play this next one. So I want you to actually understand that we've got something real powerful going on. You guys definitely need to get this.
Some very shocking documents that I saw at the Library of Congress 2 weeks ago on August 10th, on August 9th, had to do with the hearings of the McCormick-Dickstein Committee of November 1934. Show that Prescott Bush and the DuPont family, the Remington family, and J.P. Morgan tried to overthrow the U.S. government, assassinate FDR, and put a Hitler-style fascist state in place. I have in my possession testimony from the McCormick-Dickstein Committee in November of 1934 by one of the fascist plotters that they were going to follow Hitler's model exactly and impose martial law on the United States, round up unemployed people that were worthless to the economy and troublemakers and Jews and put them into internment camps. And their plan was, if necessary, to exterminate the people that could not be part of the effort. The only reason the coup attempt in 1934 didn't succeed is that they hired the wrong general to lead it, General Smedley Butler, the great Marine hero, 2-time Congressional Medal of Honor winner, who worked with the plotters just long enough to be able to identify who they were and then blew the whistle on them to Congress. Incredibly, after being warned by the FBI and the Justice Department and the Treasury Department to cease and desist in their Nazi dealings, they had continued them until 1951. There had been 28 additional seizures of Nazi assets and Nazi business fronts between late 1942 and 1951, and that they had moved Nazi assets into Switzerland, Brazil, Argentina, and Panama, and they had continued to do business with their primary Nazi patron, who was Fritz Thyssen, who backed Hitler beginning in 1921 and who was the wealthiest man in Germany, and a steel and coal baron who, with his partner Friedrich Flick, essentially built the Nazi war machine along with I.G. Farben.
In business with the Nazis, raising money, creating the Hitler monster. Yeah, trying to overthrow the government. This was all suppressed. Trump is not new. Trump is one of those guys that he saw what was done in the past. He saw how wealthy they got. He saw that they're getting old. Perhaps I can step in. And he finally made some buddies who said, you know what, we're going to stick you out there. Okay, He's not new. It's been going on for about 100 years in this country. That's how long it's taken them, these family lines, to destroy any concept of democracy that we might have. And the story continues.
In 1951, when Fritz Thyssen died in Argentina, Union Banking Corporation was liquidated by the U.S. government, and Prescott Bush received $1.5 million for his holdings in his Nazi business, and that was the beginning of the Bush family fortune for all intents and purposes. George Bush doesn't take his philosophical foundation from the Bible or the teachings of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. George Bush takes his inspiration from what he learned in Skull and Bones and from the Thule Society that Hitler and Goebbels and Goring cut their teeth in, Bohemian Grove, these evil organizations that perpetrate the ugly things that these criminals are doing to this country, for which they must be held accountable. Now you look at the Republican National Convention this week, and you bring in Arnold Schwarzenegger to speak last night. Schwarzenegger is the son of a Nazi. He has praised Nazis. He has praised Hitler. He talked last night in terms like, we will not falter, we will not waver, we will win this war on terror.
He's a leader who doesn't flinch, who doesn't waver, and does not back down.
Well, that's exactly the speeches that Hitler made after the Reichstag fire. Terrorism and the homeland being under attack are precisely the issues that Hitler used to subvert everything within the German system of government. This is a criminal regime. They not only emulate Hitler, but its genesis comes from Hitler. And I defy anyone, a historian, journalist, author, anyone, to come forward and disprove my premise that you cannot differentiate Hitler's invasion of Poland in 1939 and the Reichstag fire and his attempt to dominate the world from George W. Bush's unprovoked invasion of Iraq and subversion of the Constitution through the Patriot Act after 9/11, which I submit is his Reichstag fire.
And we see Mr. Schwarzenegger in there, and I'm hoping, I like watching his shows. I dig his movies. His political record, it's up in the air. The Democrats didn't complain too much about Mr. Schwarzenegger. And part of it is that he's part of that movie industry. So maybe he was treading lightly. I don't know. I'm hoping that he's not co-opted. It's always that possibility. I hope that, that he's the Schwarzenegger that we see. But, his background is suspect. Mr. Schwarzenegger and Mr. Weeder, It's all suspect. Who knows what goes on behind the shadows? Who knows? I'm hoping good things, but that didn't look good, that appearance. But they all use each other, so who knows, right? So I'm going to play this last part of this film.
Karl Rove and his minions are every bit the masters of propaganda that Joseph Goebbels was. They literally took lessons from Goebbels and Goring about how to create such brilliant propaganda that unreality can become reality, and reality can be subverted to fantasy political subterfuge right before your eyes. So there's just an endless broken record that is leading up to the present era, that the Bush family has had a single goal for 100 years, which is to become the most powerful family on the planet and to rule the world. And they are on the verge of doing that under George W. Bush. It's critical that every citizen of this country rise up and do something, because the day of reckoning is at hand, and these people are Nazis. They are practicing Nazi philosophy. They are mimicking Nazi tactics, and time is running out.
Wow. Like I said, pretty powerful stuff, but it is more leaning towards actual conspiracy than it is theory. A lot of this information is in the Library of Congress, and it's not just, folks on the outside create it. A lot of this is government records, newspapers of the past. It's just so much, okay? The records are there. I don't know how long they're going to be there, because the more we call attention to it, most likely it's going to, over time, start to disappear, or your rights to have access to it is going to be cut off. But you need to understand where everybody is at. So I'd like to have a conversation about totalitarianism, authoritarianism, and fascism. Let's just kind of go into how they're currently modern day being defined, all right? So we need to actually look at that. So the state of totalitarianism and authoritarianism and fascism. Totalitarianism is a form of government in which the state's power is unlimited and controls virtually all aspects of public and private life. All right, I hope I'm saying this clearly, okay? This control extends to all political and financial matters, as well as the attitudes, morals, and beliefs of the people. The concept of totalitarianism was developed in the 1920s by the Italian fascists. And one we know Mussolini, big time, right? Examples and characteristics that might be present in a totalitarian state. Sorry, I'm just tripping all over my words. Rules enforced by a single dictator, the presence of a single ruling political party, strict censorship, if not control of the press, okay, constant dissemination of pro-government propaganda. There's a lot of that. A tremendous amount. Mandatory service in the military for all citizens. Certain countries, Israel's one of them, okay? Hey, everybody's playing. Mandatory population control practices. China loves it, all right? But we're talking about the United States. I know. Won't get into these other guys. They do what they do. Prohibition of certain religious or political groups and practices. We hear that a lot. Prohibition of any form of public criticism of the government. Man, are we hearing that right now? It's hot. Laws enforced by secret police forces or the military. Laws enforced by secret police forces or the military. The guards everywhere. ICE, we don't know who they are. They're everywhere. Then it says, typically the characteristics of a totalitarian state, man, I'm getting tongue twisted here, tend to cause people to fear their government. Educated people are scared to death. So rather than trying to get rid of that fear, ease the fear, these rulers encourage it. And they use it to ensure the people's cooperation. Now, an authoritarian state is characterized by a strong central government that allows people limited political freedom. All right? And it says, however, the political process, as well as individual freedom, is controlled by the government without any constitutional accountability. All these things sound familiar, what we're going through, but one of them is real clear, and we'll get to that. Authoritarianism's four most recognizable characteristics: limited political freedom, which with strict government controls imposed on political institutions and groups like legislatures, political parties, and interest groups. A controlling regime that justifies itself to the people as a necessary evil, uniquely capable of coping with easily recognizable societal problems such as hunger, poverty, and violent insurgency. All right. Strict government imposed constraints on social freedoms, such as suppression of political opponents. I'll say that again: suppression of political opponents and anti-regime activity. And they'll label that to their liking, all right? The presence of a ruling executive with vague, shifting, and loosely defined powers. Executive orders, chiclets, Tic Tacs, anyone? Fascism is a political ideology that is characterized by an authoritarian nationalism, racism, well, aren't we seeing that? And the repression of public dissent, aren't we seeing that? Fascism has three main tenets: authoritarianism, nationalism, and anti-communism, all right? They have 10 key characteristics, all right? Opposition to Marxism. Not really hearing that yet, but it's out there. Opposition to political and cultural liberalism. Boy, that echoes loud. Glorification of the state. Only when he needs it. Got to find those patriots. Extreme nationalism. White nationalists, American only, blah, blah, blah. Imperialism. I want condos in Gaza. I want Canada. I want Iceland. I want Greenland. I want Panama. Opposition to parliamentary democracy, totalitarian ambition, military values, acceptance of racism. Oh, there's good people on both sides. Man, they only talk about the bad things about slavery. Economic policies that are conservative, hiding behind conservatives. Mass mobilization, education as character building. Hey, we're going to rewrite the Bible and put it in the schools. And we're going to add the Constitution, but we're going to take it back to the early 1900s of the Constitution. That's what they're doing. Fascism does not greatly distinguish itself from the other despots or totalitarian regimes. As a form of social political Darwinism, i.e., the doctrine of survival of the fittest, with the necessity of struggle for the life of a nation. You hear that from all of the skinheads, the Nazis, and blah, blah, blah. Peaceful, complacent nations were seen as doomed to fall before struggle and aggressive militarism, which is a leading characteristic of a fascism state. All right. So the reality they're telling you is those states are weak if they're seeking peace, and they're going to fall. They're really going to fall. So I got to play this last piece from Jeremy Scahill, formerly of The Intercept, but he's all over the web. This guy, Democracy Now!, he's done so much. And he's telling you the truth. Check this out.
As the sun set over Washington Monday, President Bush's coffin arrived at the Capitol. A hero's welcome heralded by cannons and a 21-gun salute.
The national religion of the United States is American exceptionalism. And we are now in the midst of a grotesque canonization of one of its imperial saints, George Herbert Walker Bush. Every media outlet in this country, every politician, Democrat and Republican, engaged in collective eulogy based on lies. Lies about who Bush was, lies about his policies, lies about the mass killing he oversaw during his life at the highest levels of power in the United States government. George H.W. Bush was an unrepentant war criminal who spent the overwhelming majority of his life making the world a worse place, a more dangerous place, and he leaves behind a global trail of tears, of bloodshed, of death and destruction. His legacy can be seen in the poverty and corruption of Central and Latin America. It can be seen in the never-ending killing fields of Iraq. It can be seen in the international criminals that he pardoned after Iran-Contra and the systematic violence of the so-called war on drugs. This legacy can be seen in the scourge of AIDS, the presence of a sexual harasser, Clarence Thomas, on the Supreme Court, who, in a sick irony of history, replaced Thurgood Marshall, the first black Supreme Court justice and a noble man. George H.W. Bush came from a powerful family. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth to a father who cozied up to the Nazis, desecrated the grave of the indigenous leader Geronimo, and whose businesses contributed to the imperial agenda of forcing the poor of the world into indentured servitude. This is the eulogy that George H.W. Bush should be receiving. Instead, we have this.
Throughout his long life, George Bush was admired as a man of decency, modesty, and uncommon achievement.
I just want to get up into heaven, and I don't get there by bragging on myself. My mother told me that years ago.
George Herbert Walker Bush today is being remembered as a great man and as a gentle soul.
The 41st president honored today not just as a statesman, but as a father and neighbor. The Houston Symphony paying tribute to his love of colorful socks.
The U.S. and international news media are engaging in sick propaganda. Leave the stories about how classy he supposedly was, how cool his marriage was, how he built a father-son relationship with Bill Clinton, how much he liked Barack Obama, how he always wore those funny socks. Leave all of that to the family in their private memorials. But for the rest of us, for the rest of the world, we must remember that his incalculable crimes were committed in public, from the highest chambers of power in the most dominant nation in the world. The accounting for his crimes should also be done in public. But no, we're told we have to have respect. We're told that Now is not the time to discuss any of this. We're told that we must pretend that he was not a mass murderer with so much blood on his hands. Donald Trump doesn't have enough time left in his life to commit even a fraction of the international crimes that George H.W. Bush carried out during his decades in power at the CIA, as vice president, and ultimately as president. Not even close. Journalists today believe that they're so brave in calling out Trump's lies, in investigating his real estate deals, in probing his associates, and yet none of them have the spine to accurately describe the well-documented, indisputable crimes committed by George H.W. Bush. What we are witnessing is a powerful media class and an elite political class whitewashing the life of a man who used his various positions not to make the world a better place, but to wage unthinkable wars, to undermine democratic movements, to kill innocent people, to orchestrate coups and invasions. And the reason no one talks about these crimes is because it's a sacrilege to do so in the American religion of exceptionalism.
I'll never apologize for the United States of America. Ever. I don't care what the facts are.
When an unarmed black man is shot dead by the police in this country, the media is often flooded with stories about how they were troubled kids, how they had criminal records, or they were drug users, how they had run-ins with the law. The pictures used in these stories are often ones where the men are presented as thugs or as scary. Journalists probe deep into the lives of Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown and Eric Garner.
The jury in the George Zimmerman murder trial is expected to learn today that Trayvon Martin had marijuana in his system when he was shot.
These are the final moments of 18-year-old Michael Brown. So we've taken you inside of this convenience store. We've heard from Ferguson police that they say he was without a doubt involved in what they call a strong arm robbery.
Shortly after the funeral ended, one of several search warrants connected to the investigation became public record. The list of some of the items seized from Botham Jean's apartment, including a small amount of marijuana.
News organizations did everything in their power to smear these black men in death with absolutely no regard for their families or respect for their humanity. If George H.W. Bush was treated the same way as these black men, it would take months of nonstop 24/7 coverage to even begin to describe the tip of the iceberg of the unforgivable deeds that Bush committed. Why? Because he committed his crimes as President of the United States, and the nature of his crimes was imperial. He did it with bombs and tanks and invasions and coups. In watching the gross hagiography on display this week, I'm reminded of the quote from Voltaire: "It is forbidden to kill, therefore all murderers are punished unless they kill in large numbers and to the sound of trumpets." That is who George Herbert Walker Bush was, a man who killed in large numbers to the sound of trumpets. You want to talk about disrespecting the dead? Let's talk about the 400 people that Bush incinerated in a Baghdad bomb shelter in February of 1991. How does this celebration of their murderer and his sense of humor and funny socks feel to their families? And let us remember the so-called highway of death, where Bush authorized the mass slaughter of retreating Iraqi military units, bombing thousands of vehicles and killing untold numbers of soldiers in retreat.
They turned it into a trash heap.
Pilots called the 3-mile-long stretch of charred bodies and vehicles the highway of death. Initial reports were of tremendous carnage, thousands dead.
Now, we all know that Bush's son, George W. Bush, lied the U.S. into the invasion and occupation of Iraq. But it was a lesson that he learned from his dad. In the build-up to the 1991 Gulf War, powerful public relations firms orchestrated a campaign to convince the world that Iraqi soldiers had gone into Kuwaiti hospitals and killed babies in incubators and stabbed pregnant women. This campaign, based entirely on fiction, culminated with a bipartisan congressional hearing supposedly on human rights. It featured a young Kuwaiti girl who fought back tears as she claimed to have been a volunteer at a hospital in Kuwait where she witnessed these atrocities.
While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor. It was horrifying.
What the public was not told at that time was that this little girl was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States. This whole thing was orchestrated by powerful American PR firms. And this girl had witnessed none of these fake crimes. But the lies were repeated over and over as Bush made his case for war.
They had kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
Both U.S. wars against Iraq were based on lies, and both were run by presidents named Bush. If you speak honestly about who George H.W. Bush really was, then you, by necessity, will be indicting the history, the politics, the legacy of the United States. If you speak honestly about Bush, then the myth of American exceptionalism is laid bare.
Okay. So the next question is, why am I doing this? Because I want you to see what's been going on, that you've been asleep for at least 100 years. Yeah, I know, a lot of you haven't been alive that long, but this nation, the people, have been watching all this unfold in plain sight, but have not been able to recognize what's been going on because the story has been spun for so long. It's all coming to a head, and that's what we're seeing right now. The other reason I'm doing this is, and I got to do this, this is why. Yes, January 6th. This is when it became overt that they would literally do anything for their fascist state. That's what we're seeing, and I just wanted to bring you up to speed. You need to come out of your slumber, see the world for what it is, so that we can have our democracy. I'm Michael P. America. Thank you for watching episode 6, and I hope you play this over and over and over again so that you understand and we can fight this beast. You have a great evening.